Yeah, it happened, and I didn't get to be a part of it.
You mean it's coming up or it's last?
No, last Wednesday.
Why was that? What day is it?
I'm not sure why they picked that particular day. Did I leave a pair of keys someplace? It was several Christian groups that had predicted. The conjunction of having 2 blood moons this year and 2 last year stimulated a fair amount of conjecture. But I thought it was interesting that you have all the way from one group that is saying that these blood moons mean nothing. They have no impact. They're prophetically insignificant, to another group saying that, you know, this past week was the end of the world. It's a little interesting to me that there aren't more people taking the middle of the road, because every time there have been, we call them blood moons, really they're just total eclipses. And the total eclipse, if you watch it at certain points, it will look kind of red. But every time this has happened historically, it's had that time has been a very important time for the Jews or the nation of Israel. And
Is that one of those days when, like the couple that was in Israel, they were shot by the Jews? Remember there was just like a day of just terrible.
I'm not sure. I'm trying to figure out what date was Wednesday.
The 7th.
7th. And I think that's why they might have picked it, because they keep forgetting that God's not on the Roman calendar. But I was thinking, how many of you have noticed the news coming out of the Middle East? I mean, what's going on in Israel right now is beyond incredible. And there really isn't the start of what I'd say a third intifada. But what I'm noticing that I find significant are the number of attacks now that I would call spontaneous. They're not planned. And some of them are by very young people, children. A 6-year-old kid was involved in one. And I get a couple of, what's the word I want here? I want to say announcement, but I get different posts from different groups, and there's a group called Progressive Jews for Israel or something. Anyway, and they send me things, and it's basically a hate Israel site. And I was reading some of the stuff there, and here's the thing I find amazing, are the number of people that look at the Jews as the interlopers, the ones who shouldn't be in the land. And you know, if you're honest with yourself historically, both people were there. When all this started in the 1900s, both groups were there, and a solution should somehow figure out how to allow these two to live together. And my suggestion is that a state that doesn't allow anybody from the other race to be there is never going to work. And yet the whole world is pushing for a solution that has a Palestinian state that will not allow one Jew to be there, ever. And this will bring peace. It's just monstrous and strange. I'm just putting this out as a guess that what we're going to see this year, these last 2 years where we've had eclipses on Passover and the first day of Sukkot, now it's happened 2 years in a row, that in some way God is bringing the mission and the destiny of Israel to the forefront of the world. And it's like He's giving us a chance to make a choice. And I find it amazing, for instance, with this Iranian deal that we just made, and I don't like to get too political in church, but it's amazing that our government went ahead with a deal that the nation that it impacts the most, who's our best friend in the region, pled with us not to make. That's an odd thing to me. And the other thing is that the very thing that the enemies of the deal said would happen have happened. By signing this deal, It's emboldened Russia to make an alliance with Iran and Assad in Syria, and we're creating an axis of people who are very powerful who really don't like us, and they certainly don't like Israel. My suggestion is look at those things. Don't be terrified that it's the end of the world. When, quote, the end of the world comes, God will have that in control. But I don't think we should be silly either, that there are things happening in the world that if you apply a biblical worldview to it, it's hard to understand why nations are making the decisions they're making. And just this morning, in Turkey, there are a group of people, you probably don't know a lot about this, and I don't either, but in Turkey you have one major people group, but then you have the Kurds, who are not only in Turkey, but they're in Iraq. But they got together to have a demonstration this morning. Someone blew off 2 bombs, and last I knew, it had killed nearly 90 people, sent a couple hundred people to the hospital. And we're getting too used to that. That's not the way you make your point. And I'm just still surprised that those of us in the world don't stand up and say, this has to stop and end it. You know, you can stop it if you put your resources and whatever behind it. But it's reading these posts to the Progressive Jews for Israel thing, I was amazed at the number of people that say that if the Jews would just make peace with the Palestinians, everything would be fine. And there's this lack of recognition. Certainly not all Arabs feel this way, certainly not all Palestinians. But the official line is that Jews don't have a right to be in Israel, and that the nation of Israel does not have the right to exist. This is one place that I think being political could be important, because I have a sense that God is behind the nation of Israel. That doesn't mean that everybody in the nation of Israel does what's right, or that the government is always right, but that the right to exist in some way proclaims the truth of the Scripture. And I think that's why we see a reaction basically from the belly of hell against it. Because every time you see that nation in the land, it says that God's promise to His people will be fulfilled. So it is a very significant time. I am officially saying that the house of Aaron does not endorse theologies that need bad things to happen. If your idea of theology is the stock market has to collapse, there has to be a bloodbath, and the world descends into a cesspool of mess, change your theology, please. I like the one that says, in that day a new generation shall rise and conquer. Sharon, have you got a scripture? Yeah, why don't you get one? We get the young people up here.